In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the splash screen plugin to kind of take a little bit more control of your splash screen in your applications. So if you're not already aware, a splash screen is the image that displays for a few seconds when you first launch an application from your phone. So generally that's just perhaps your company's logo or something like that. And the idea, I think, behind the splash screens is that it kind of makes the loading process seem a bit smoother, because when you tap an application, something launches right away, and then that gives your application time to actually load in the background, and then the splash screen will disappear. And so all this happens by default. We just have our splash screens defined to be whatever we want. Ionic has some default ones that it's using here. But we just sort of replace these with our own splash screens, and then for the most part, it just all happens automatically. Our graphic will get displayed, and then it disappears, and our application will begin. Now, usually that's all you'd want to do, but you can kind of configure this splash screen a little bit as well if you want. So by default, these are the kind of configurations we have for the splash screen. And so this has a splash screen delay of 3 seconds. It specifies the time it will take for the splash screen to fade away. And so these are just all the default options, and some of these apply differently between iOS and Android. But if we want to configure this a little bit, we can change these properties, and we can also use the splash screen plugin. And so this is it's a plugin provided by Cordova, but of course we also have our Ionic native implementation of that we can use. And so as well as having all of the different preferences that we can set in the config file for the plugin itself, we can also use this plugin to show and hide the splash screen whenever we want. So if the splash screen is currently displaying and we call this code from the application, then it will hide the splash screen. And if the splash screen is currently not showing and we call show, then it will show the splash screen. So usually you're probably not going to want to use this, but there may be circumstances where it makes sense to do that. And so I'm going to walk through one particular example where you might want to manually hide the splash screen yourself rather than letting it auto hide when the application is ready. And so to do that, I'm just going to use this application that I've been working on for a tutorial recently. It's not really relevant to this tutorial. We'll just be using it as an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the splash screen to never hide by default. So there's a preference we can set in the config file. I believe it's auto hide splash screen. And so by default, this is going to be set to true. So as soon as the application is ready and it can hide the splash screen, it'll get rid of it. But what we can do is instead switch this to false. So if I add this to the config file here, and let me just check that that's not already defined somewhere. Cool. So now I'm just going to change that to false. So now when I run the application, the splash screen should never get hidden, which is obviously going to be a problem for using the application because we're not going to be ever able to get into the application. But let's just see what that looks like. And so I'm going to use the emulator for this on the computer rather than a device. Obviously it's a bit easier to show on video if I use the emulator. But generally I just use my phone connected to the computer when I can. So we'll just wait for that to finish compiling there, and then that's going to restart the application, and we'll be able to see the splash screen. Okay, so the build succeeded there. It should restart that any second now. Okay, so it's gone out of that application. It's going to launch it again for us. And hopefully we should see the splash screen there. We do. Oops, and it's still... Okay, so I wasn't expecting that to happen because I forgot that the Ionic applications by default when they are generated actually have they have this splash screen plugin installed by default, and by default this code is also included in the platform.ready call here, and that's going to hide that splash screen, which is actually the functionality we were going to discuss. So we'll just comment that out now, and we'll go on with what we were going to do originally. But yeah, essentially we're able to, as I mentioned before, we can make a call to that splash screen plugin to hide the splash screen. So we'll save that and we'll try run the application again, and hopefully this time we have it displaying the splash screen indefinitely. So I'll just run emulate again and we'll wait for it to refresh. Okay, so it is launching again now. Hopefully this stays here. And it does. So we just have the splash screen kind of indefinitely displaying now. We've got the little spinner animation going. And at this point, well, we're not going to be able to do anything with the application. And so as you just saw, we commented out this code here, which hid the splash screen. And so this code triggers when the application first loads. So this is the root component. So this is pretty much going to be the first thing that runs in the application. But a reason why you might not want to hide the splash screen here and kind of have this set up where the splash screen just displays indefinitely until you call this code is perhaps you want to, I don't know, you want to set something up first, or I don't know, load some SDK in from the web. It could be anything really, just something where you don't want the splash screen to disappear until you're ready for the user to see something. So just as an example for that, in this tutorial here, it's just as you might be able to tell in here, it's from what we saw before, it was a simple sort of drawing application. And so this sort of thing probably isn't necessary for this, but let's say in our component here, this is the component that implements the functionality for the drawing stuff. And so in this sort of ng after viewer init hook here, we do some setup, all which happens pretty much instantaneously. But let's say, for example, maybe we were doing something in here, like loading in some graphics library from some URL or something, and we wanted that setup process to complete before we hide the splash screen. And so that's where we could do something like this. So we could import that splash screen plugin in here. And remember that if this plugin isn't set up by default, Ionic sets it up by default now, but if in the future, if you're watching this and it is no longer a default, just remember that you actually need to install the plugin first, and you'll also need to add it into the providers here. But for us, it's already set up, so all we need to do is import that here and then add it to the constructor. And then we can make that call to that hide function. So if I just copy this code here, and we're just going to dump it in the ng after viewer init, and we'll need to call this .splashScreen.hide since we're not inside the constructor anymore. And so first it will run whatever code is in here, and then it will run this. And so if we were doing that example where it was loading in, say, some graphics library or something, some SDK, you'd also need to make sure that you make this call inside of some kind of callback function for that, so that it runs after the library is loaded in rather than straight after the call is made. Now I have another video on asynchronous behavior in Ionic applications, so if you didn't really understand what I was just talking about there, it might be worth giving that a watch too. So I'll link to that. So if we load the application again now, emulate it again, we should have the splash screen disappearing, and it's mostly going to look exactly like it did originally, with the difference being that at that point when the splash screen hides, we know we've done whatever it was that we wanted to do. And this probably isn't, it's not always going to be the greatest idea. If you've got something that's going to take a long time to load in, you don't necessarily want to have the user waiting on the splash screen for a long period of time. It probably would be better to remove the splash screen and have some kind of loading process in your app itself to give some kind of feedback to the user so that they know your app isn't just frozen. So let's take a look at this now and see if it does work. Hopefully it does. So it doesn't appear to actually be disappearing right now. So I'll just open up the Safari browser so we can get into the debugging tools here, the remote debugging. And so if we jump into, we'll refresh this. so we can see if anything happens from the beginning. And yes, I thought this isn't saying that the splash screen plugin isn't installed. And so what that likely means is that we're trying to call this too early. So in this code here, we're running that inside of that platform.ready.then function, which ensures that the platform is ready and we're going to have all those plugins available before we attempt to make any calls. In this case, it's running too quickly before that happens, which actually means that this would have run after this anyway. So it's a bit of a silly example, really, but just for the sake of completing it here, we'll also import platform, which we're already doing actually, which is handy, and then we'll just also use this platform.ready.then call. So we'll just add this .platform.ready.then, and we'll make sure that we're only running this code after the platform is ready. So we'll save that again, and we will try to run it again. And I suspect this time everything will run fine. Okay, so the build has succeeded again, so we'll just wait on that to deploy to the simulator here. Okay, so everything is restarting now. Now we have the splash screen, and then it disappears, and then we can use our lovely drawing application. So as I said, this is a bit of a silly example because this code is running so quickly that the splash screen is getting called before the platform is even ready. A better example would have been actually having some kind of SDK load in and then calling the hide function after that has finished loading. But at least it does highlight the fact that you can hide the splash screen at any point in time by calling that hide function. And if you wanted to show the splash screen, you could also do that as well. And so it might come in useful in circumstances where maybe you're doing some setup that's going to take a couple seconds or something like that. That's probably fine to display the splash screen. But as I mentioned, be careful using it. If you are going to load in something, like some kind of library that's going to take a while, you don't want the user to be stuck on the splash screen for a long time. And you obviously also have to make sure that you do at some point call that function. If whatever you're doing was to fail, if you were waiting on some success callback to hide the splash screen, that may never happen. Perhaps the user's offline, the call fails for whatever reason, this code never gets run, then that is going to be stuck on the splash screen indefinitely. So it can be a useful sort of technique to use, but make sure that it makes sense for usability purposes as well. Okay, so we made a few mistakes along the way in this one, but I think it was a good opportunity to try a few little debugging steps and sort things out. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.